Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Katerji show with me, your host, Katerji. How are you guys doing tonight? It's been an interesting few days here in Ukraine. So we're going to do a Ukraine episode. Good evening, Queen Sabine, whatever. We're going to do a Ukraine episode today. We're going to dive into those protests that happened last week. Regarding that anti-corruption bill. We're going to talk about some of the right-wing, American personalities that tried to misrepresent what these protests were about. We're going to talk to a dear friend of mine, Jimmy Rushton, who was there on the ground. I was there too. Briefly, I wasn't there for the entire time like Jimmy was. So we're going to go into more detail, but also talk about how the conflict's going, what the current state of those front lines are, what the prospects are going forward for the rest of the fighting season, really. We're halfway through the fighting season, more than halfway through. So we'll see what lays in store for the rest of 2025 and what 2026 looks like even. So anyway, if you're watching along on YouTube, thank you so much for catching up with the show. Please do like and subscribe if you are enjoying the content. We are a very small channel and we are trying to grow, so you can help us do that by supporting us with a little like or a comment or a follow. All that stuff really helps. If you're watching live on Twitch, this is the only way to interact live with the show. So thank you guys who are on the Twitch chat. If you're watching on Twitter live, if you want to come and ask some questions, you have to sign up on Twitch. It's totally free. Make an account and join the chat and you can ask questions directly here. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my esteemed guest, Jimmy Rushton. Good evening, Jimmy.
Hello. Don't think anyone's been esteemed before.
Well, there you go. You're esteemed now. So listen, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, what your background is and what you've been doing the last few years?
Sure. I'm Jimmy Rushton. I'm a security and foreign policy analyst and a freelance journalist, and I moved to Ukraine in May 2022. I've been here ever since, so this is my 4th year in Ukraine now. I've traveled pretty much everywhere in Ukraine apart from Crimea. I've done lots of frontline reporting. And I've written for Telegraph, New Lines, The Insider, Yahoo News, amongst others. Done lots of stuff for Times Radio, LBC, that sort of stuff, really. Yeah.
Great. So look, let's dive right into these protests. Can you give us a bit of a background about them, how this all started? Obviously, there have been rumblings about this and that there were op-eds published in the press. You know, this wasn't a hidden thing. There was quite a lot of, scrutiny going on about this bill before it passed Parliament. And after it passed Parliament, there was an immediate public backlash. There were protests on the streets, not just in Kyiv, but all over the place. So talk us through that legislation and then the following, how we ended up with street protests, and then we'll move on from the street protests with another question.
Okay, so I think the key thing to note here is that it actually wasn't an individual bill presented on its own merits. It was an amendment to an additional bill. So it was Bill 12414. And the original bill was to do with finding the location of people that were missing in either the occupied territories or missing in action. But this amendment was tacked on at very short notice. It was presented, then passed, then signed all in one day. And essentially what it did, it did quite a lot of things, but essentially I'm going to just simplify it. It removed the independence of two anti-corruption bodies, NABO and SAPO. NABO, which is the anti-corruption investigation branch of the Ukrainian security state, and SAPO, which is the specialized anti-corruption prosecutor. So NABU would investigate, and then SAPO would do the prosecutions. And essentially what it did was it put those two organizations directly under the control of a political appointee, the General Prosecutor of Ukraine, which is appointed by the president, which means essentially that the president would have direct control via a political appointee of any anti-corruption investigation or prosecution, which would have meant obviously a massive conflict of interest. And understandably, Ukrainians were not particularly happy about this, especially considering the Zelenskyy and Yermak is the head of the presidential office, exerted considerable pressure on MPs to pass this and pass it very quickly. And then we saw obviously protests and we kind of know the story from there.
Well, let's talk about those protests because they started off, very, very. It was like a viral call from several figures, for military personnel. We should say active military personnel were involved in organising the protests, and it very much wasn't any kind of protest regarding anything to do with the war. But again, that's my perspective. Why don't you tell me your perspective on, you were there, you spoke to the protesters,
Yep.
and we'll try and tally up our experiences.
Okay, so the main person behind the protest was an ex-veteran of the military called Dmitry Kozyatinskiy. He's actually a veteran of Da Vinci Wolves, which is a very, very well-known unit in Ukraine. I spoke to him a few days ago. He was actually in Czechia when the war started. He came back voluntarily, joined up with Da Vinci Wolves, fought for 2.5 years, then left military service. He called this protest. He said, come and assemble in Ivan Franko Square at 8 o'clock when the bill was passed, and a bunch of people came. First day, it was about 3,000, 4,000 people, I would say. Second day was 3-4 times that many, probably 15 to 20,000, I think, in total, because people were coming in and out. And the square was completely packed, and the streets, nearby were filled up as well. There was multiple protests and huge numbers of people. And then the next day was slightly less, but the protests actually continue. There are people there tonight protesting because I think they feel they need to keep the pressure up. When I spoke to people, they were furious. They were deeply unhappy. They thought this was an attempt by the government to protect political figures and entrench corruption in the political system. I saw lots of people saying that they were taking Ukraine back to 2013, i.e. before the Maidan. Posters of Zelenskyy's face superimposed next to Yanukovych, stuff like that. Interestingly, the first night was mainly young Ukrainians, and then the second night was a far wider age range. So you had like middle-aged and older Ukrainians there, because I think it's far easier for younger people just to kind of appear out of nowhere because they have fewer commitments, right? So but it was very interesting, and I think the government was shocked by the amount of people that turned out. I think they thought this could pass and people would just accept it, but that wasn't the case. And it created a lot of anger amongst serving military as well, who couldn't attend, because you're banned under Ukrainian law from attending protests when you're in the military, at least openly. I saw a couple there that were wearing masks or that were in civilian clothes. That people that I knew that were in the military were there. But many in the military were posting supportive messages on social media. They were saying that the protesters had to come out to support the troops because the troops are fighting, so they were relying on the younger people and the people in Kyiv to come out and protest. And I should also mention protests took place across Ukraine, including places like Kharkiv, which is obviously much closer to the Russian border and comes under Russian missile and bombing attacks regularly. So it's very brave for people to come out there. This is a significantly more dangerous place than Kyiv.
Yeah, look, I agree with your view of speaking to people. I even saw that same Yanukovych protester, and there was quite a lot of anger. I mean, look, that was the first night, and then Zelenskyy responded to those protests on the second night, but didn't suggest that immediate compromise. It very much looked on the beginning of the second day that they were going to plow forward with these changes. They did that. They had that photo in the president's office, and they were all doing the Tory power pose. Do you know what the Tory power pose is? Theresa May and David Cameron back in the day, they did the sort of stand like that. Anyway, so they did a photo where all the president's administration is doing the Tory power pose, and then basically there was a second day of protest, as you said, which was much larger, and that anger, really was people comparing him to Yanukovych that's a big thing, right? Put that into context for people to because again, Zelenskyy hasn't had that kind of major public backlash directed towards him at any point in his political career so far.
So Maidan was about two things. It was about protesters wanting Ukraine to continue on its trajectory towards Europe. It was also about corruption, and those two are very, very closely intertwined as well, because generally the view is that the closer you get towards Europe, the less corrupt you become, and the closer you get to Russia, the more corrupt you become. So yeah, for Ukrainian protesters to compare him to Yanukovych, and I saw that multiple times. There was multiple comparisons to Yanukovych, especially on the second night. Yeah, they were deeply unhappy. I would say it's quite nuanced though. It's not. They weren't really anti-Zelenskyy, as opposed to, I didn't really see any protesters asking for him to resign, but I did see a lot of people wanting other people in his administration to resign, particularly Yermak and Tatarov. Also, they wanted him to listen to them. They wanted him to, do what he came into office pledging to do, which was to be anti-corrupt, right? When he came to office, he launched one of the first things he did was launch a tip line for Ukrainians that have been offered bribes. You could phone up this number and report when you've been offered a bribe, or other corrupt action. So he was one of his attractive qualities to Ukrainians was he wasn't part of this entrenched political elite, which a lot of Ukrainians view as kleptocratic. Even now, like that, Ukrainians still view many in the ruling class as corrupt. Unfortunately, although it's significantly better than it was under Yanukovych.
We've got a question here from Moss Levy, who says, who was behind the amendment and why was Zelenskyy pushing for it, given how unpopular it would be? So you mentioned Yermak there. So let's talk about Yermak, the man behind the presidency. There was a recent deep dive into him. It escapes me now who did it. I think it was so it was the Financial Times, right? Yeah. So yeah, you should go check that article out. It's a really fascinating feature. Again, he's been called the man behind the presidency. So could you tell us a bit about Yermak and maybe try and understand some of Yermak's thinking with this bill? Because again, look, the government did claim that there was Russian infiltration in parts of these cases that were going on. I didn't see much in the way of substantiation there, but that's not that uncommon here in Ukraine, given the martial law and the situation with security. So it's not like all of these details are out in open and in public all the time, like it would in a normal functioning democracy that wasn't under martial law and under an invasion. So could you tell us a bit about what was Yermak's thinking here? Who is he, and why did he not realize this was an unpopular move?
I mean, who was behind it? Well, Zelenskyy was behind it. Zelenskyy, I think that the influence Yermak has is often exaggerated. So obviously he's influential and Zelenskyy trusts him. He's been an advisor to Zelenskyy for years and years. I would suggest people go read the Chris Miller piece in the FT, to be honest, because that's a far better summation of their relationship than I can give here. Because to be clear, I don't spend my life writing about Ukraine internal politics. But what I would say is that Yermak is very controversial because he has a lot of power. Even though he's not pulling Zelensky's strings, that's just not how the relationship works. But Zelenskyy does trust him, and he does rely on him for quite a lot. Yeah, and also there's the deputy chief Oleg Tatarov, who is even more controversial than Yermak. He was a deputy minister of internal affairs under Yanukovych. So yeah, a lot of certainly we understand why he's there.
So we had 2-3 days of major protests, as you said. Some of the protesters are still ongoing, but it's nothing like the numbers that we had during those 3 days. On that third day, there was a major rollback from Zelenskyy, who promised to bring a bill into parliament. That's supposed to be entering there's going to be a vote in parliament in the Verkhovna Rada tomorrow, Thursday, I believe. And that seemed to have, at least made some of the protesters think, rather than maybe allaying all of their concerns, it certainly made them think, for the majority of them, that they will wait to see the bill pass and what results from that. It wasn't just, of course, internal Ukrainian pressure, although that is significant, much more significant than the external pressure, I would argue. But European countries, von der Leyen, the EU were not happy about this move. So you had an internal movement against it. You had the Europeans saying, listen, if you want to join the EU, you need independent bodies. And then there was this walk back from Zelenskyy and this bill that's heading through parliament. Is that a humiliating climb down for Zelenskyy, or is that a sign of a leader who is responding to public criticism in a way that's potentially healthy, or what's your political assessment of the situation following that climb down? Where are we going into this vote this week?
It's a big question. So I think he definitely responded to pressure. It's good that he listened to the people, but there should have been enough political intelligence there that he understood why bringing this amendment forward would have been so toxic, both inside and outside Ukraine. You're right, the EU and other organizations put a significant amount of pressure on Ukraine because, it's just really not a good look. Even if there were potential problems with Nabo and Sapo, the way that they should have dealt with these is via, so either you view it as absolutely incredibly critical and you have to deal with it now, or you view it as a problem which, okay, would be nice to deal with, but maintaining unity within Ukraine and maintaining unity with Ukraine's foreign backers is far more important. And I come down on the latter side there. I don't actually think that there were huge issues with these anti-corruption bodies. I think they were doing a very difficult job in very difficult circumstances. And I think people, they were investigating powerful people and they didn't get the results that they probably should have done. But that is kind of understandable considering, the sort of people that they were investigating, MPs, wealthy Ukrainian figures in industry, etc. So, did these bodies need reform? Sure. I mean, most bodies in Ukraine could do with some reform. That's absolutely almost always true. But, it wasn't worth the political price that they paid to do it in this way. And I don't think the actual motivation behind the bill was to reform them anyway, to be honest. I think it was to bring them under political control. But again, I can't say for sure, because obviously the only people that know this are Zelenskyy and Yermak and the other people within the presidential office.
Okay, look, so we got some more audience questions here. One from Queen Sabine is asking, is the West pushing for Zelenskyy to be replaced by Zelenskyy? I can answer that. No, I don't know of any pressure on there. I think some American right-wing commentators have made this suggestion I've seen on the dark dregs of the internet, but I don't think they realize that Zelenskyy is much more hawkish than Zelenskyy would be. So in their minds, Zelenskyy would be replaced for someone who would end the war, but there is no one popular in Ukrainian politics now that fits that fits the mold of someone that would sign a peace deal with Russia right now that would be accepted by the Ukrainian people. I can't see that happening. So no, I don't think there is that movement. We have 007 Cat 424 Dev asking, have you heard anything about the petition several activist groups put forward demanding RADA meetings to be televised again? I haven't heard of that personally. And did you hear demands regarding more parliamentary transparency from the protesters? That to you, Jimmy, was there frustration with the parliamentary process under martial law?
Frustration with the MPs, for sure. I mean, I understand. So I have heard of that petition, and the official response is that it's too dangerous to broadcast sessions live for obviously for security reasons. I mean, fair enough. I understand. I understand that point, but at the same time, for the Ukrainians that want more democratic accountability, I also see why they're frustrated. So I think it's a difficult question. How do you maintain a parliamentary presidential democracy under law when you have credible threats of Russian missile strikes on centers of power in Kyiv?
So we got one more question from Rami before we move on to some of the wider war stuff, which is where both you and I are much more comfortable than this sort of internal politics. But Rami's asking how to strongly oppose corruption and autocracy without playing into Russian hands while being invaded. Again, that's the key question, really, is how does this Ukrainian government do that, stay legitimate, stay popular? They have to deal with domestic issues all the time, not just on corruption, but many different things. How to do all of that while being invaded is the question.
Well, I mean, corruption is cancer to a war effort. So the stronger you are at fighting corruption, the more effective your war effort will be. Just by definition, because corruption funnels money away from where it should be and into the hands of private citizens. So there's no real conflict of interest there. Autocracy. I don't think that's a fair way to describe Zelenskyy or the government, because they are adhering to the Ukrainian constitution. You can't hold elections under martial law. I do think, if I personally was advising Zelenskyy, it's a ridiculous suggestion, but I would say, bear in mind of your position, despite the fact that you are acting within the Ukrainian constitution. I think you should be more consensus driven when you're making laws, and you're potentially making controversial laws, and you should be very mindful of the fact that this will be exploited by bad actors to say, hey, you're a dictator or what have you, because you're not, but you do have extraordinary powers because it's an extraordinary situation. So corruption, no problem at all. The harder you are on corruption, the better it is for Ukraine, the better it is for the war effort. But on the other thing, it's difficult, very difficult.
So we got a point here made by RGB RVB, who said the speed at which Zelenskyy reverted his position is striking for a European citizen. I suppose he means president. Usually 3 days of protest in a Western European country doesn't get you anything. Yes, I agree. But the point that Jimmy raised was also quite important, that protests aren't technically legal under martial law. So it was a huge act of bravery for those protesters and the military ones who serving military personnel who did that under the risk of potential court martial. So look, it was a significant thing, and I think that it's probably more. 3 days of protest in wartime Ukraine is probably more significant politically than 3 days of protest anywhere else. But I do think it is also important to bear in mind that Zelenskyy responding quickly to public outcry, even though it was a complete own goal by his administration, I do think that that's a sign of a democracy that is healthy and strong, not one that is really going through major political turmoil. We haven't seen. I will say there was no sign of state repression. I'm sure Jimmy will agree with me. There were very few police officers there at the protest, and the ones that were there were, in a public safety capacity. They weren't trying to, box the protesters in any way. But look, we've dealt with those protests. I think we've answered those questions. I will ask you one more question about that. Actually, I saw you sparring with some of those, right-wing American, MAGA influencers and Marjorie Taylor Greene and so on, and how they were miscategorizing the protests. Why do you think it's important to push back about those kind of, misrepresentations of what was taking place here?
Well, I mean, I replied to both of them quite early on, so my reply was quite high up in the order. So anyone that jumped into their replies would see that me posting about it, and then I linked to a piece that I did for the Telegraph about it. They're just distortions, and to be honest, these people are pathological liars, so you're never going to get them to be honest about anything. If MTG's lips are moving, she's lying about something. So but it's important. This was not an anti-war protest, categorically so. Like, there were, they every 5-10 minutes they stopped to chant the Ukrainian anthem, and they were chanting Putin Hula, which means Putin is a dickhead, quite regularly as well. So, it was not an anti-war protest. They didn't even want Zelenskyy to resign. They weren't chanting for Zelenskyy to resign. And I didn't see any banners with Zelenskyy resign either. My Ukrainian isn't great, but I can read Ukrainian just about, and I could understand what was on the vast majority of the posters. I didn't see one saying Zelenskyy should resign. I saw a lot of criticism of Zelenskyy, but I didn't see anyone asking for his resignation. And in fact, when I spoke to Dmitry, the guy who called the protests, he specifically said, "We don't want Zelenskyy to resign. We can't have elections during wartime. We want him to listen to us."
So look, let's move on to the situation as it is on the front lines. You've recently been visiting some positions. Can you talk to us a little bit about your last deployment, the bits that you can talk to us about, what you saw, what kind of things you were talking to the soldiers about, and what the situation is like currently on parts of the battlefield that you were able to see?
Sure. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a deployment, but I was with 3rd Assault Brigade in the east, and I spent a week and a half with them. I went to a couple of their positions, went to some of their command centers, went to some of their training centers, spoke to a significant number of their troops about this and that. Particularly they're upgrading to core status, because part of the Ukrainian military reforms, the much needed Ukrainian military reforms, is the upgrading of a bunch of Ukraine's best brigades to Army Corps. So they're essentially moving away from a brigade-based command and control system to a corps-based system, which is, they should have done this years ago, but it's good. It means essentially that instead of having a bunch of different brigades along the front line, all basically having their own chain of command, you'll have multiple different brigades under one corps, which means you'll have centralized command and control. Everyone will know what everyone else is doing. You won't have any situations, hopefully, where you have botched rotations or one brigade retreating without telling the ones to the left and the right that they're retreating, which has happened multiple times. Also, third are exceptionally good when it comes to training or command and control. Generally, in their own brigade is fantastic. All of their leaders are ex-infantry, so you don't have any guys that are just promoted because they're, they have political connections or they're wealthy. They are all ex-infantry, and the sense of the esprit de corps, the sense of confidence the soldiers have, is significantly higher than any other brigade that I've been in or been around, maybe with the exception of like Azov. Azov are very good as well. 93rd Hartier, they're also very good, but third, they're one of the largest. In fact, they are the largest brigade even before they were upgraded to core status. So they're going to be about 40,000 strong when they're at full strength as an army corps, and they'll be capable of complex offensive and defensive actions on their own.
I mean, it has to be said, the size of the 3rd Brigade alone and its battle hardness, it really puts to shame many Western European militaries with the capabilities that these guys have, and the tried and tested approaches they have to warfare. One of the questions I have for you: what are some of the problems that they're experiencing at the moment? You know, we've had artillery shortages in the past. You know, what's the situation? I understand the artillery situation has got slightly better for Ukrainians in recent months, but they're still not at parity with the Russians. So what are some of those difficulties that they're going through? Let's start with the difficulties, and then we can start talking about some of the strengths that they may have adapted to over the time.
So are you talking specifically about third or just in general here?
In general, yeah. You can use the third to draw upon your knowledge of, but again, you've got a much more macro picture than other people do. So
yeah. So there is such a massive difference between, say, 3rd Assault Brigade, Azov 93rd or whatever, and a typical Ukrainian brigade. You can't really compare them. So one of the biggest problems in the Ukrainian military is training. The training is not good enough. Just is not good enough at all. And for your regular, and I spoke to one of the soldiers in one of the brigades that is coming under 3rd Army Corps command. And I asked him about his training, and he spent 45 days doing basic training. The majority of that time was spent cutting wood. He had 4 hours a week tactical medicine training. And when he got to his unit, he had no further unit training, right? Now, let me compare that with 3rd Assault Brigade. So 3rd Assault Brigade, you have 45 days of basic training, but that's 3rd Assault basic training. Half of your training is tactical medicine, right? When you've done your 45 days, you then go into a unit of 3rd Assault. You then have an additional 5 weeks of 3rd Assault unit training before you get to go and do some, assaults or whatever. So that's the massive difference there. And it needs to change. It's, to be honest, it's astonishing that it hasn't changed. And to be honest, if you're not training people properly, you're setting them up for failure. And if you fail in a war like this, you die. Simple as that.
So one question I have for you about training specifically is that there were some floated ideas, a few months ago. The French, maybe the British, might consider. I mean, we already know there are already British forces on the ground in Ukraine, and there are American forces on the ground, or have been in advisory capacities, in so on. So we understand that those forces have existed, but a larger training contingent, say in Lviv or something in the back line, that would again help bring that training regiment closer to where the Ukrainians need it, rather than having to send them to, the UK or France or Germany for training. Would that help the Ukrainians? Would it be enough? Is it scalable, or is that just a drop in the ocean compared to what Ukraine's needs are?
I mean, it depends entirely on the numbers of trainers, but so essentially what you could do, and here's the thing, right? So giving a Ukrainian soldier Western basic training is not enough, right? So they need, and Western basic training is generally pretty good, right? If I've spoken to Ukrainian soldiers that went to the UK as part of Interflex, one of them actually, a guy called Corvo, who's in third, he told me that his training was very good. One thing that he liked as well is that he got all of his kit that he was training with, he got to keep. So he got his rifle, he got his boots, all of his British kit, and he loved that, and that was great. And his instructors were very good. But then critically, he wasn't just thrown straight into the fight when he got back. He then had his additional 5 weeks of third assault training, which taught him the stuff that the British Army instructors just can't teach him. So stuff with drones, etc., etc. So there is obviously specifics about this war that Western instructors can't teach, but that doesn't mean that Western instructors can't be helpful, because there are some aspects of soldiering of the NATO way of war, so like troop leading procedures, war knows, etc. All of the stuff that is more about kind of theoretical, about how you lead soldiers, about how you plan missions, about how you learn from your mistakes. Because one of the big problems in the Ukrainian military is they don't learn from their mistakes that well. That's why you keep seeing repeated strikes on training grounds, right? And nobody has seemed to come to the conclusion that if you see a reconnaissance drone, a Russian reconnaissance drone, above your training ground, You should get in fucking shelters. And it's really frustrating because it keeps happening, and nobody seems to, in the Ukraine military command, seems to be doing anything about it. Every week there's another strike on a training ground, and it's killing Ukrainians completely needlessly. The other thing is, in regards to training, get the Western instructors in. Train them in the west of Ukraine where it's relatively safe, where you have a lot of warning for any potential incoming. And then what you can do is you can learn from the Ukrainians about drones, right? So you can kind of run like a parallel knowledge exchange. You can have Western instructors training Ukrainians on basic infantry tactics and, leadership and that sort of stuff. And then you can have Ukrainians training the Western instructors on how to use small tactical level drones in this kind of war, because that is knowledge that Ukrainians have and we don't have. It shouldn't just be viewed as charity. We can absolutely learn from them, and we can help them at the same time. I think that should be the lesson that we kind of take away from this back in the UK. But you're right. I mean, it makes much more sense training them in Ukraine than it does training them in the UK.
Look, I think that's a really important point. I was literally just about to jump in and say that this isn't just a one-way street, and actually the amount of battlefield knowledge that Ukrainian soldiers have is really, really valuable for NATO at the moment, and they really should be all in on trying to learn Ukrainian drone best practices, because the Russians have their own best practices and we don't yet. We don't have, entire drone divisions and so on. And it's crazy that we don't, because we need them. Because if we ever engage in peer-to-peer warfare, and it's very likely that we could, however, even dealing with non-peers, non-state actors now have access to, all kinds of capabilities that the Ukrainians have. I mean, Ukraine has a better track record with it, and they're a state, they have more resources, but this is one of the things that I saw a video of in recent days was a drone dropping an IED, and the IED was disguised as a small bush. Again, that might not be something that works in the middle of the Iraqi desert, but in Ukrainian territory, in European territory, that kind of thing could be really lethal to infantry. So it's sort of, these kinds of developing techniques and things that are happening on the ground here are really valuable for our own militaries too.
Absolutely. And here's the thing, right? The best drone unit in this war currently is not Ukrainian, it's Russian. It's called Rubicon. It's Rubicon Center of Advanced Technologies, or something very similar. But anyway, it's the unit that was brought in to help drive the Ukrainians out of Kursk. It brought the road from Sumy Oblast to Sudzha, which we traveled on, by the way, if you remember. It brought that road under fire control, and they basically took apart Ukrainian logistics. They mainly use fiber optic drones. They're now being deployed against 3rd Assault Brigade, and I spoke to members of 3rd Assault's own drone guys, and they told me that they are absolutely, firstly, they're very, very, very good. And secondly, they have basically unlimited funding because they're attached to the GRU. So they're not part of any kind of army structure. They're directly under Russian military intelligence. So they have latitude to use whatever weaponry they want in relation to drones. They can basically use whatever tactics they want. And they're basically sent around the front to, the hottest spots where Russia needs to press the Ukrainians hardest. And if we fight Russia, we'll be coming up against these guys. And I'll tell you what, if we went up against these guys in the British military, we get fucking slaughtered. It wouldn't even, our guys would die, by the thousand. And we don't have that many thousands of troops to deploy. We are so unprepared for drone warfare. It's terrifying. And nobody in the UK seems to understand this at all. I've spoken to people when they've come out here, British military, British politicians, MPs, etc. They don't get it. They just don't get it. And I think part of the reason is, in order to fix this problem, they need to spend money. And they, as we both know, budgets in the UK are extremely tight. There's huge amounts of pressures on budgets, defense budget, and everything in the UK, and they just don't want to spend the money. It's the same in the US. I mean, the Americans are doing slightly better, but they're still not prepared. They really don't understand how unprepared they are either. That's part of the problem. They still think electronic warfare will save them.
One of those things, again, you're talking about the EW measures. That's important. Let's talk about some of that as well. But one of the other things is that the West has long had their own drone programs. We've had loitering munitions, switchblades, so on. And we sent some of these to the Ukrainians, and now all of those things that there were sent are completely obsolete here, right? Basically, all of the Western drones that they sent have been, in this arms race of electronic warfare and so on. Basically, the fiber optic now is king, and anything below it is just struggling. So, talk us through that arms race and where we are now in this current phase of the drone war.
Sure. So, I mean, in UK terms, we don't have any loitering munitions. We had a program. It was called Fire Shadow, and we cancelled it because our defense procurement is a joke, and everyone in the MOD should be fired. To be honest, we spend an astonishing amount of money and get basically, nothing for it. If you look at our actual capabilities, if we went into a real war, with anyone serious and not some forms like counterinsurgency, brushfire conflict like Afghanistan or Iraq, we'd be toast. In terms of drones, we had Watchkeeper, which was called Groundkeeper, by the way, in the British military, because it never flew. It was hopelessly unreliable. And yeah, in terms of EW, so look, you're right. Fiber optic drones obviously impervious to EW. They are more expensive. They aren't as capable generally. So you're still seeing a lot of radio controlled FPVs, which, they work pretty well. Most EW isn't actually that great. It's limited in duration. You can't have it on for that long because it will either overheat or drain the battery. If you have vehicle mounted EW, then obviously that works better, but even then it can overheat. And also, if you're running EW, that jams your own drones. So a lot of commanders prefer to not have EW and be able to use their own kind of drones for observation. Also with EW, because it emits a signal, it basically tells them exactly where you are. So it's not it's not a silver bullet solution, unfortunately. And some EW is basically completely worthless, like those directional RF EW weapons, like those guns, are pretty much useless. And if you use those against an FPV, you'll die quite simply.
I'm astonished to see those those big old, look like space laser guns, right? They would do nothing to the vast majority of the drones that we see, but they're still deployed. You go to the marathon or you go to whatever, and you will see Western European, and it's so far behind where we are. That again, it does majorly worry me. I am majorly concerned that we will see a major either non-state or state attack. The Russians could cause havoc with just a few FPV drones around London if they were so minded to.
I mean, the major limiting factor in regards to so a non-state actor using drones, and I'm specifically talking about a violent non-state actor in the UK here, where getting military grade explosives is difficult. You can
not impossible.
Very, very difficult. I mean, there's a reason why, say, 7.7 was TTAP, right? That hydrogen peroxide based explosive, which is incredibly unstable, and is not so you don't get enough explosive power for the weight in order to make it a really ineffective weapon. So I think the threat is obviously real. My big worry, to be honest, is if you think about how this changes one example, right? If you think how this changes the VIP protection environment. So you have traditionally, if you're protecting a VIP, your main threat would be bombs, or snipers, right? So you check sight lines, you check everything in advance. But now with an FPV drone, assuming you can get explosives for it, you can be basically anywhere within a 15-kilometer range. If it's fiber optic, EW isn't going to work on it, and B, you're not going to have any warning that it's coming. unless you have some form of like radar detection. And yeah, these things can take down helicopters, right? So it's terrifying from that perspective. I think looking at state level threats, just look at Operation Spider's Web. That's what you can do with FPV drones. If you're coming up against a state actor that knows what they're doing, yeah.
I think Operation Spiderweb, I did a special podcast episode about it. This is not a drill. Check out my podcast if you haven't already. That was, it wasn't just, a very impressive, audacious attack by the Ukrainians. It should have been the benchmark for what state actors around the world should be expecting future conflict to look like. Because if the Ukrainians can do it, believe me, like, this is a replicable technology. It's not difficult to do. It's difficult to pull off, but all you have to do is get the technology to where it needs to go, and they did the rest. So look, one of the questions we've got here from the audience is about Ukraine's manpower issue. One random Algerian asks about demographics as the war will continue for years. Do you think there's going to be it's more concerning for Ukraine manpower wise?
For sure. I mean, obviously, just simple statistics. Russia has more people, so yeah, it's concerning for Ukraine. I think from a Ukrainian perspective, they are attempting to address this using technology rather than manpower. But you can't hold a trench with a drone. You need people in trenches to hold territory, right? So, yeah, it's concerning, 100%. You can't. Yeah.
We've got a question from 007 Cat 24 Dev, who says there's been a lot of attempted Russian pushes towards Zaporizhia and Dnipro. What do the soldiers on the front lines think about that? Will the defense hold with the use of fiber optic drones increasing even more?
Yeah, I mean, they're nowhere near either of those cities, to be honest. But obviously, fiber optic drones in Russia fiber optic drones were actually invented by the Ukrainians, but because they were using radio controlled drones so effectively, they didn't put the R&D into them. So Russia essentially had a first mover advantage in regards to fiber optic drones. That being said, Ukraine is using a lot of them now. The other thing is, right, so if you imagine drones, so drones punish movement, right? Essentially, you have 25 kilometer zone where everything is observed, and then 15 kilometer zone where FPVs are just everywhere. And I mean, they are everywhere. They are constant. And if you're detected on either side, you'll have a stream of drones just coming at you one after the other, basically endless, right? But that punishes people going on the offensive more than it does on the defensive. Because if you're on the defensive, you're not trying to cover territory. Now, obviously, there are exemptions to this. When you're rotating troops, so when you're going into and from positions, that is literally the most dangerous time for a Ukrainian soldier at this point, getting to and from positions. But you're still, if you have a well-constructed blindage shelter, you're relatively immune from drones at that point. But the Russians obviously are advancing. They're trying to get to your position. And at that point, they are far more likely to be, vulnerable to drones. So yeah, it punishes the person that's going on the offensive more in the proliferation of drones. Yeah.
So look, you've got a lot of experience. You've done the Ukrainian drone training, FPV drone training. So you've spent a lot of time with these drone units. So you have quite a hands-on understanding of some of the drone technologies. So look, I was really wondering if you could talk us through like an idiot's guide to fiber optic drones, because again, they basically have a cable. How does that work? Like explain it to us like we're children, basically, because again, the idea of flying a cable across a battlefield, is that not easily traceable? Does that not have difficulties? Does it get snagged on trees? These kinds of just, idiot's guide questions. I'm really fascinated to understand how the fiber optic drone itself works. Is there a big spool? Is that do they have to carry around thousands and thousands of meters of fiber optic cables with them? Talk us through that whole process.
I mean, it's basically just that. It's an FPV drone, standard FPV drone, has a big fiber optic spool, generally underneath. And these can be up to, Magyar's Birds had one which was 41.5 kilometers. So you can imagine that's a lot of fiber optic wire. And the fiber optic cable is actually very strong. So if you know, it has a lot of tensile strength, right? So you can pull it and it doesn't snap. If you try and manipulate it horizontally, it does snap. And you can see this actually. I'm sure you've seen some videos of soldiers like literally snapping the cable. So, but and it controls roughly the same as a normal FPV. You have to be conscious that the cable is behind you, so you can't do any flips or anything like that. You can't do that. You also have more weight. So generally, an FPV's range is a radio-controlled FPV's range is defined by two factors: transmission ability, so the ability of the drone to pick up signals and to send signals back, and battery power. So the heavier it is, essentially, the shorter the range, because the heavier it is, the more difficult it is for the propellers to fly it around. The more power you expend, and that translates into greater or lesser range. Fiber optic FPVs, so they can have less range because they're heavier, but they also don't have to have the transmission. So what you'll generally find is the range will be slightly less than your most effective long-range radio-controlled FPVs. And Ukrainians are very clever. They have like repeaters that retranslate the signal from ground station to drone, so they can send them a really, really long way. Some of the longest range radio-controlled FPVs have been like 60 kilometers. So, you know, they go a long way. FPVs, like just generally flying an FPV, difficult to learn. Once the training that I did, so it was 10 days intensive training, which is like sometimes 14 hours a day, and it culminated with a practical test where you basically had to drive to a field, set up a ground station, prepare a drone for flight, then take off, find a pre-selected target about 4 or 5 kilometers away, and then hit that target with the drone. And if you did that, you pass the test and you get your little certificate. And then if you're in the Ukrainian military, you then go off to join a drone unit, and then you do training with that drone unit as well.
So look, we're reaching the end of the show. We've got a couple of those audience questions I wanted to fire at you, but I want to do a much deeper dive into drone warfare here. So expect another episode to dive into this in more detail. But one of the fascinating things, again, we've talked about some of the difficulties that Ukraine is experiencing. Let's try and talk about some of the positives as well. One thing is that Russia's summer offensive, a lot of hype around that, hasn't had significant success in making any significant ground so far. So the Ukrainians are holding the line in parts of the country that people, a year ago were writing those parts of, Pokrovsk is still held. And I remember a year ago, people were saying that Pokrovsk is about to fall. So what are some of the successes that Ukrainians are having? But also some of the strategies employed by the Ukrainians. Now, this is something I want to do a full episode on, but I understand the Ukrainians have a video game type point system for drones. If you kill a soldier, or if you hit a tank or so on, that these have certain points, and a point tally wins prizes for those units. Those units win more drones to expend if they, so the units that have the best results are the ones that end up with the best gear. So gamifying the whole experience, which is already quite gamified, because these are people using VR goggles and joysticks essentially. So talk us through it. I mean, I don't know if you know much about that system, but do you? Yeah. Talk us through that system. How it's having an impact on the psychology of those drone units behind them, and what kind of impact it's having on the ground.
Well, you don't need to incentivize Ukrainians to kill Russians. Like, they're happy to do that. Really, the system is all it is it's a way to get the best supplies to the best drone units. It's a way to identify success and potentially identify weakness as well. It's not particularly complicated, and it works in the sense that obviously, again, the best units get the best equipment. Obviously, you could argue that there's a little bit of a it could be a little bit self-defeating, because obviously if you have the best units that get the best equipment, they'll continue to be the best units, and you can't, maybe some of the units that could be quite good, if they had a little bit of time and extra equipment invested in them, they don't, because they can't earn enough kills in order to get enough equipment, which means they can't earn enough kills, and etc. So but it's really, as you describe, it's a way to identify success and to get equipment to the guys that use it in the best possible way.
So a couple of quick fire questions here. What are the countermeasures developed against fiber optic drones, and have you seen any use of ground-based robots, UGVs?
Yes, in lots of use of ground-based robots, both for supply runs, for evacuations of wounded, for fire support. So I saw one of 3rd Assault Brigade that's got an M2 machine gun on it, which is quite cool. Also, like demolition robots, so robots that have got huge amounts of explosives on them that which go to a Russian position and blow up. Countermeasures for fiber optic FPVs. Most important thing is concealment. You don't want to be seen. Secondly, physical barriers, nets. Thirdly and finally, shotguns. You don't want to have to use it, but if you have no other choice, you're caught in the open, you can't take cover, or it's essentially between you and that drone, and you've got a shotgun, you've got at least a fighting chance for taking it down. And I've seen the third guys practicing with shotguns, using clay pigeon throwers to take down drones using I think Remington 870 tactical shotguns, and they work. They do work, yeah.
We've got a question here from OLN who's asking, what would it take for Ukraine to go fuck it and attack facilities Russia uses to produce and export fossil gas and fertilizer to the EU? I mean, as far as I understand, they have been attacking those facilities. Maybe not the actual metering stations, but they have been attacking oil.
Not fertilizer.
Not fertilizer, but they have been attacking natural fossil gas and fuel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, they've done that repeatedly, and they should do, and the EU should not bitch about it, because they're fighting an existential war, and as far as I'm concerned, anything within the bounds of obviously the laws of warfare is acceptable. No targets off the table.
So look, you've had some praise here. 007 Cat 24 Dev says, by the way, you should absolutely invite Jimmy again for those future episodes you mentioned. He's great at explaining. Look at that, Jimmy. People like your manners. That's I love it. I love it.
Well, I try my best.
You're as cantankerous as I am. I think that's why we get along so well. So.
Well, not all the time. To be honest, I'm very, very tired at the moment. As you probably know, living in Ukraine, you don't often get that much sleep. And annoyingly, it's not even airstrikes at the moment. It's just thunder. Like last night, a massive thunderstrike directly over my building sounded identical to a ballistic missile. And I was like, Jesus Christ. But I checked my phone. There was no air raid alert, so it was just thunder.
Yeah. I've got a leaky roof at the moment, so if you guys are feeling sympathetic to me, there's the Ko-fi link down below. My roof is genuinely leaking. I will send photos to anyone who doesn't believe me. But look, we are at the end of the show, so I just wanted to ask again a final question. Really, we touched on it, but we didn't manage to explore it. Is there any positive developments on the battlefield for Ukraine? Is there things that that Ukraine can look forward to and say this is at least going our way in this direction? Because it's a lot of doom and gloom, when we talk about the situation. Because again, anyone who's involved in covering this war knows how many people are dying, knows how difficult it is for the soldiers. We have friends on those front lines. Yep. We're worried about them. So it's very difficult for us to try and maintain any kind of positivity when we're dealing with this. But again, there are reasons to be not, if not rather positive, but not to feel hopeless about the situation for Ukraine. Talk us through some of those. Let's try and end on a more positive note.
So look, I don't want to be a booster or a doomer. I tend to try and be objective. One thing I will say is, so firstly, I'm going to address the overall strategic picture. Russia is no closer to defeating Ukraine than it was in February 2022. In fact, it's further away, because if you look at the actual things Russia could have done to actually threaten the stability and the functioning of Ukraine as an independent state, they would have had to take the capital. They're nowhere near Kyiv, and they're not going to be able to get anywhere near Kyiv ever again. It's as simple as that. They are expending astonishing amounts of manpower to take completely devastated territory in the east of Ukraine, which has nobody living there basically, and will never be economically productive in any of our lifetimes, because it's destroyed. It's strewn with landmines and unexploded ordnance. So what are they gaining? Practically nothing. If you look at Donetsk, which has been under Russian occupation since 2014, has no water. There's massive protests about this at the moment. Life in the occupied territories is absolutely hellish, even for those pro-Russians and Russians which moved to the occupied territories from Russia proper. So yeah, for Russia, they are expending astonishing amounts of manpower for nothing really, and Ukraine again is nowhere near losing. It's as simple as that. Ukraine, a lot of Ukrainians are dying, but they are dying to defend their country against Russian occupation. If you speak to your average Ukrainian, they will say, I'd rather die than be under Russian occupation, really. I can't obviously speak for everyone in Ukraine, but the majority of people that I speak to, and if you look at, opinion polling, that's a viewpoint which is dominant here. Coming down from the strategic level, Ukraine is doing much better around Sumy. They've been pushing the Russians back in that direction, and around Izium way, they're holding the line. Kupiansk doesn't look great, and obviously down south, Kostianstynivka, it's incredibly difficult. But again, taking these cities does not bring Russia any closer to winning this war. It just doesn't. They don't have a theory of victory, really. Their theory of victory, I think, is to hold out until Ukraine collapses and the West gets bored or tired of supporting Ukraine. But, developments in Washington actually are positive at the moment. And I know I don't like Trump, and I don't hold any, hope in him waking up tomorrow and becoming a Reaganite Republican, but he does seem to be moving in a direction which is more positive for Ukraine. Foreign military sales. Today we saw 25% tariffs on India, and one of the reasons given was that they're buying lots of Russian energy. So, yeah, in that sense, it looks more positive. But yeah, this is. I don't want to be. Again,
don't want to be a Debbie Downer.
No, I don't want to be a downer, but I don't want to be a booster either. I think it's an incredibly difficult, incredibly brutal war. Ukraine is paying a horrendous price for essentially wanting to be a free country and to live under their own rule and not the rule of Russia, the old imperialist master. And it's everyone, if they can, should do anything that they can to support them, really, in that respect.
Well, listen, I wanted to thank you, Jimmy, for joining us on the show. We've had loads of questions tonight. We don't normally get anywhere near this amount of questions, so they've all obviously really enjoyed picking your brains. Thanks for coming on. We'd love to have you back on again soon for another deep dive into Ukrainian drones. But again, yeah, thank you. If people want to follow along your work, where's the best place they can do that, Jimmy?
So I'm on Twitter, Jimmy Sec UK. I'm on Instagram, although I don't use it that much, but I do sometimes post some interesting photos from particularly the protests, which is Jimmy Rushton UK on Instagram. And that's that really. I obviously publish in Telegraph and in other publications as well. I have a Substack as well, which is Notes from Kyiv.
Okay. Well, listen, if you're following along on YouTube or watching on Twitch even, you'll be able to find the links to Jimmy's Substack and his Twitter in the show notes on YouTube and on Twitch. So thanks again, Jimmy. It's been wonderful having you on. I understand it's late here in Kyiv, so I'll let you get on with it. Yeah, okay. All right, good night, mate, and thanks so much for joining us, all right? See you soon.
Cheers, bye.
So that was Jimmy Rushton. Really glad to have him on. He's a dear friend of mine. So it's easy to get your friends on and have a little chat like that. But very, very fun to get his perspective on everything that's going on. And we tried to bring some positivity towards proceedings, because I know it can get a bit doomerist at times. So look, wow, we've had like about 1,000 viewers, more than 1,000 viewers tonight. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. Really, really appreciate it as always. If you've enjoyed any of this, please do consider liking and subscribing, following and supporting us in any way that you can. Really helps the channel grow, and we can keep bringing you more of these interesting discussions week in, week out. Tomorrow, we've got a fantastic episode. We've got Matthew Collins from Hope Not Hate. He's an anti-fascist campaigner, and he was recently played by Stephen Graham. You know, the actor Stephen Graham. He was recently played by Stephen Graham in a adaptation of his life. He was a member of a fascist organization, left that fascist organization, and campaigned against them, and became a sort of a voice for people to make that journey, and to to really get involved in the kind of work that de-radicalizes people and that moves people away from right-wing extremism. And I think that's a really, really fascinating guest to have on. I really can't wait to hear his perspectives on things. We're going to be talking a little bit about the anti-immigration stuff that's happening in the UK at the moment, but really it'll be an opportunity to talk about his life, his work, what it was like to have a famous actor play you in a TV adaptation, all that good stuff. So please do tune in tomorrow night. That's going to be a really great show. But look, also I'm open to thoughts. If you've got any ideas for shows you want to throw my way, please do, pop them in a YouTube comment, throw them here, send me a DM. Really, really appreciate, feedback. It's important that we get. Sorry, briefly disconnected there. So yeah, if you've got any ideas that you want to throw our way, please do write a message to us, let us know. And yeah, really, really looking forward to seeing you guys for tomorrow's show. So thanks again. Thanks for joining the Oz Katerji show, wherever you're watching, Twitch, YouTube, wherever. Please do like and subscribe. Really helps us grow. I've been Oz Katerji. This has been the Oz Katerji show. I'll see you tomorrow for Matthew Collins from Hope Not Hate. Good night.